Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Archives. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. When I was 18, freshly graduated and stumbling into that strange phase of life where you're half adult, half confused kid, I started dating a girl named Perry. She was one of those girls who didn't quite fit in with the rest of the world. Not in a bad way, just in the way clever, artistic, eccentric girls always seem to. She had a sharp mind and a strange sense of humor, the kind of girl who seemed to live halfway between the real world and some other imaginative place only she had access to. Maybe that's why I liked her so much. At 18, people who don't behave like everyone else feel electric. From the beginning, Perry would tell me stories about ghosts in her house. Not ghost stories like the ones kids tell under blankets at sleepovers. She spoke about them casually, like she was describing neighbors or family friends. "There's an old man who walks around the backyard," she'd say between bites of cereal. "He doesn't bother anyone." Or, "There's a guy who stands at the foot of my bed. He just watches me sleep. He's harmless, though." She said it so calmly that it almost sounded normal. Her friends went along with it too, which must have been the part that made me doubt myself for a moment or two. One night, we had a small party at her place. Music, snacks, cheap alcohol, the usual. Someone set up a big tent in the backyard because they thought it would be fun to sit outside and talk. At one point, one of her friends wandered back to the tent looking dazed, like she'd just woken from a dream. "I just chatted with the old man ghost by the tree," she said. Another friend didn't even blink. "Oh, how's he doing?" "He's okay. He never makes any sense." Everyone nodded like this was completely normal, and the conversation drifted back to something else. I remember sitting there thinking, what planet did I just land on? But I told myself it was just teenage nonsense, the kind of creepy joke culture groups of close friends sometimes create. Maybe they all enjoyed the idea of their house being haunted. Maybe it made their lives feel more interesting. Whenever I asked to actually see one of these ghosts, they suddenly developed the same excuse. "Oh, you just missed it," or "he was here a second ago," or "bad timing," every time. So I chalked the whole thing up to teenage girl theatrics, quirky but harmless. Something I could tolerate because Perry was fun, smart, and interesting, despite the weirdness. One evening, maybe a month or two into dating her, we were all hanging out in her living room. Blackadder was playing on the TV, Season 3, which she swore was the best. I still remember the faint glow of the screen, the way everyone in the room laughed at the clever dialogue and ridiculous jokes. Perry was curled up against me on the couch, warm and relaxed, her hair falling against my shoulder. A few friends were sitting on the floor with blankets. Someone else was lying upside down across an armchair, sipping something sugary from a plastic cup. It was one of those cozy, harmless nights where nothing strange is supposed to happen. But then the room grew quiet, completely, unnaturally quiet. It didn't happen slowly the way conversations sometimes die down. It happened all at once. One moment people were laughing and talking. The next moment every voice stopped mid-sentence, like they all felt something shift at the exact same time. The air changed. It tightened, thickened, grew cold. The silence wasn't empty. It felt full, like something heavy had dropped into the room without making a sound. Perry stiffened against me. When I looked down at her, her eyes were wide, wider than I'd ever seen, stretched open with fear. She wasn't blinking. She wasn't breathing properly. She was staring past me, completely locked onto something behind my shoulder. Her body didn't move, but I could feel the panic radiating off her. Right then, I felt that strange instinct humans get before their brain understands what's going on. My stomach dropped sharply like I'd missed a step on a staircase. A wave of cold washed up my neck and across my shoulders. A crawling sensation prickled along my skin. It was the same kind of moment you read about in ghost stories but never believe because it sounds too dramatic. Until it happens to you. I turned my head slowly, almost afraid to look but unable to stop myself. There was something in the corner of the living room. A shape, a dark shape, humanoid but not exactly human, not detailed enough to have facial features or limbs I could clearly see, but unmistakably the outline of a person. A shadow standing where no shadow should be. It wasn't the shadow of furniture or someone in the room. It wasn't a trick of the light, it was just there like a solid mass of darkness that had peeled itself away from the wall. It moved slightly, back and forth, almost like it was swaying. Not enough to be obvious, but enough that I couldn't convince myself it was still. I stared at it, struggling to breathe, and felt that strange sensation you get when you stare at an empty sky for too long. The whole room seemed to warp, like space itself bent inward. My vision felt wrong, like the edges of the room were being pulled toward the shadow. I heard myself whisper, "What the?" But before I could finish, before I could decide whether to run or shout or close my eyes, the shape vanished. Instantly, completely. It didn't fade or dissolve. It was just there 1 second and gone the next, like someone cut it out of reality with scissors. As soon as it disappeared, the falling sensation in my stomach stopped. The cold drained out of my neck. I could breathe again. The air felt normal. It was as if someone had flipped a switch and everything returned to the way it had been before. I turned back to Perry, finishing my sentence in a shaking voice. "What the fuck was that?" She didn't look surprised anymore. She didn't even look bothered. Her expression went back to calm, like someone pressing play after pausing a movie. "I told you there was a ghost," she said casually, and she turned back toward the TV as if nothing unusual had happened, as if we hadn't just seen something impossible. The rest of the room slowly resumed its chatter. People laughed, someone made a comment about the show, and life went on. But I barely heard any of it. My thoughts were a mess, and I couldn't shake the cold spot in my chest where fear had settled. I kept glancing at the corner, half expecting the shape to return. It didn't. For years after, I tried to rationalize it. I'm not someone who jumps to supernatural conclusions. I like explanations rooted in logic. Tricks of light, unusual reflections, air pressure changes, collective psychology. I tried to believe it was something like that. Maybe the TV light hit the wall at a weird angle. Maybe the heat from the lamps and the cool air from outside created some visual distortion. Maybe everyone else reacted before I understood what was happening, and my own fear just followed theirs. But none of those theories ever felt satisfying. Not when I remembered the way the entire atmosphere shifted. Not when I remembered the way my body reacted before my brain processed anything. Not when I remembered the way every person in the room stopped talking at the same exact moment. Years passed. Perry and I broke up eventually, the way teenage relationships usually do. We went our separate ways, drifted into our adult lives, and only occasionally liked each other's posts or photos online. But that moment stayed with me, not constantly, but like a strange memory floating in the back of my mind that resurfaces when I'm tired or when I catch a shadow in the corner of my eye. 6 years later, curiosity finally got the better of me. I messaged her on Facebook and asked if she remembered that night. I didn't expect her to say much. Maybe she would laugh it off or say she had no memory of it. But her reply was stranger than anything I imagined. "Well, I do have vague memories of stories of a ghost in the living room. Did he carry a noose around? Either way, either I've become a lot more sensible or he's gone pee." What the hell is that supposed to mean? Did she forget the night completely? Did she remember something different? Was she playing it down because we weren't close anymore? Or did she know more than she wanted to admit? Sometimes I wonder if Perry didn't fully understand what lived in her house, or if she understood too well and only pretended it was all harmless. Maybe she told ghost stories because they helped her cope with something she couldn't control. Maybe we all saw something real that night, something that didn't want to be seen for long. Or maybe the world just bends in ways we can't always explain, and that night was one of those rare moments where the curtain between ordinary life and something darker, stranger, thinner than air, slipped open just enough for us to look inside. I still don't know, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. Over the past summer, my friends and I made a strange habit of visiting an old covered bridge a few towns over, a place that local legends swore was haunted. I had heard bits and pieces of the story before we ever went there, but never in a way that felt entirely real. People said a girl about 16 years old had hung herself from the bridge more than a century ago, after her lover failed to show up to run away with her. Some versions of the story painted her as heartbroken and gentle, doomed to linger in grief. Others described her as angry, vengeful, capable of scratching, grabbing, or even appearing to people who stayed alone for too long. But every storyteller said the same thing. If you went there late at night and stood quietly, she might show herself. At first, visiting the bridge was nothing more than a summer thrill. The kind of thing bored teenagers and bored college kids do when they want to scare themselves, without actually risking anything. We'd heard of people taking pictures and seeing strange shadows, or feeling sudden drops in temperature, or hearing footsteps when no one else was on the bridge. None of us knew whether we believed any of it, but the excitement came from not knowing. The bridge sat on a narrow back road used mostly by farmers and old locals who didn't want to take the main highway. It was long and wooden, with beams that creaked whenever cars drove through. During the daylight hours, it was picturesque, surrounded by tall trees that swayed gently over the slow-moving brook beneath it. The sunlight filtered through the slats in the roof and cast thin rectangles of brightness across the ground. If you didn't know its story, you'd think it was beautiful, but at night, it became something entirely different. Those same beams that looked charming in the daylight formed long stripes of shifting shadows when illuminated by headlights. The brook that sounded peaceful during the day turned into a low, hollow echo beneath your feet. The forest around the bridge seemed to press closer, trapping you inside a tight corridor of wood and darkness. When you stood on the bridge at midnight, you could feel the history in the air, even if you didn't believe in ghosts. The first night we visited, it was all jokes and laughter. Someone turned on a flashlight and waved it around like we were hunting for ghosts. Another friend dared us to turn off all the lights and stand in the middle of the bridge without speaking. A few people tried to scare each other by tapping the wood or pretending to hear footsteps behind us. Every little sound made someone jump, but nothing truly frightening happened. The scariest thing we saw was the sudden appearance of headlights from an approaching car on the far end of the road, and even that was just a reminder that we weren't as alone as we thought. When we left that night, we felt proud of ourselves for not chickening out. Over the next few weeks, we went back again and again. Some nights, the bridge felt completely empty, and nothing unusual happened. Other nights felt heavy, the air colder than it should have been, but still nothing we could point to as proof. We took dozens of pictures of the beams above us, the view down the road, the forest pressed tightly around the entrance. We hoped that maybe later, when we looked closer, we'd see something we didn't notice at the time. Once we thought we had captured a strange figure near the far end of the bridge, a shape that wasn't one of us and didn't seem like a trick of the light. But after staring at it for too long, the more unsure we became. None of us wanted to admit we might not have seen what we hoped we saw. Still, there was something addictive about going there. Maybe it was the thrill, or maybe it was the idea that something unseen might be watching us. Maybe it was just the excitement of being out late together with nothing but darkness around us. Whatever it was, it kept pulling us back. The last night we went, the night that changed everything, started like all the others. There were 4 or 5 of us piled into 2 cars with snacks and hoodies, and that nervous energy that comes when you're not sure why you're doing something, but you know you're going to do it anyway. We drove down the long road that led toward the bridge, the trees forming what looked like a tunnel of tangled branches overhead. As always, there were no streetlights, only the faint glow of the moon behind the scattered clouds. The night felt still, but I didn't think much of it. When we arrived, one of our friends parked his car just past the bridge, aiming his headlights toward us to give us enough light to see. Without that single light source, we would have barely been able to tell where the road ended and the forest began. The beams cut across the wooden boards, making them look pale and worn. Every time one of us stepped forward, the floor creaked, the sound echoing down the entire length of the bridge like a warning. For some reason, I found myself walking toward the center of the bridge with one of my friends, the only girl among the group that night. The others stayed nearer to the car, talking, laughing, kicking stones, or leaning against the guardrail. But she and I drifted forward, drawn toward the silence more than the company. We stood there quietly, not speaking, listening to the brook underneath us. It made a soft, constant rushing sound, like something breathing slowly in the dark. The air coming up from the water was cold, cooler than the summer night should have been. We didn't hear any insects, no crickets, no rustling leaves. It felt as though the entire world had paused. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then we both felt it, a chill, subtle at first, then stronger. It slipped across the back of my arms and crawled down my spine. I gasped slightly, not from cold, but because the temperature had changed too suddenly to feel natural. At the exact same moment, she said, "Do you feel that?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. We stood completely still. For a long second, I thought maybe the cold was only our minds playing tricks on us. But then she froze, stiffening under the faint glow of the headlights. "Something scratched me," she whispered. She reached up and touched the back of her neck, wincing slightly. I turned quickly, shining my phone light behind her, expecting to see a moth or spider or something that could explain it, anything normal. But there was nothing. No insect, no bit of branch, not even dust on her skin. The air behind her felt motionless. Before I could even think of what to say, something at the far end of the bridge caught my eye. At first, it didn't look like anything unusual, just a shape near the bushes, something half hidden in the shadows. But as my eyes adjusted, the shape became clearer, more defined. My heart stopped. A girl stood there at the opposite end of the bridge. Not a figure made of shadows or mist. A girl, a human form standing still as stone. Her hair was long and dark, hanging over her shoulders. Her dress was white, not bright white, more like the faded fabric of something old, something worn, something that had been touched by 100 humid nights. She wasn't one of us. The only girl in our group was standing right beside me. Everyone else was near the car. Nobody had walked past us. Nobody could have gotten behind us without us hearing. Every part of my mind tried to find a normal explanation, but none existed. She didn't move. She didn't wave. She didn't tilt her head or shift her weight. She stood perfectly still, watching us. I felt the cold settle deeper into my body, heavy and unforgiving. My chest tightened. I said my friend's name softly, unable to look away. When she turned her head toward where I was staring, I told her, "There's someone down there." She looked, squinted, then frowned in confusion. "I don't see anything." My heart hammered so loudly in my ears that I barely heard her. I turned back, expecting, hoping to see the girl again, even if it meant she would still be standing there. But she was gone. In her place were only bushes, their leaves shifting slightly in the breeze. The light from the car headlights hit them differently now, making them look small and harmless. My friend asked me what I saw, and I couldn't form a proper answer. I kept trying to convince myself that the angle of the light had changed, or that the movement of leaves had played a trick on my vision. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, the truth sat uncomfortably inside me. I had seen her. Every part of me knew what I saw. The pale dress, the long hair, the stillness, the way the air changed, the sudden scratch on my friend's neck, the cold that came before she appeared. We left not long after that. I didn't say much on the way home. None of us did. The rest of the night felt distant and unreal, like we were moving through the motions without really being there. I haven't been back since that night. Part of me wants to pretend it was nothing. A trick of light, a moment of paranoia, the kind of thing your brain invents when you expect to be scared. But the memory refuses to fade. Even now, typing this, my hands feel shaky and a tight knot settles in my stomach. I keep telling myself I'll go back soon, just to prove I imagined it. But the thought of standing on that bridge again in the dark, listening to the water below and waiting for something I can't explain to show itself, makes my chest feel tight and cold. I'm already scared and I haven't even gone yet. When I was younger, I worked as a mechanic at a bowling alley. It was not a fancy job, but it was fun and strange in its own way. The bowling alley was old, the kind of place that still smelled like shoe spray, hot dogs, oil, and old carpet that had been cleaned too many times. I worked in the back area where all the machines were. Most people never saw the machines because they only looked at the lanes and pins from the customer side. But behind the lanes was a long hallway of metal, noise, and moving parts. Back there, it felt like a completely different world. My job was to fix the pin setters, which are these huge machines that pick up the pins, reset them, and return the bowling ball to the player. Each pin setter was tall, maybe 8 feet high, with ladders and flat walkways built on top of them so we could climb and repair whatever was broken. The back area always felt dark and cramped, with long shadows stretching between the machines. Even with the lights on, it always felt like the corners were hiding something. When the bowling alley was open, me and the other mechanics spent a lot of time waiting. We had to be ready in case a pin setter jammed, but most of the time, people bowled without any problems. So we would sit in the back watching movies or playing video games on a small TV someone had brought in. You could hear the steady sound of bowling balls rolling, pins crashing, and people laughing. It became a background noise we didn't pay attention to after a while, but sometimes things happened in that back area that none of us could explain. The first thing we all noticed was the black figure. When you stood behind the lanes, you could see the whole row of machines and the catwalk on top of them. The catwalk was just a long metal platform that connected all the machines together. It was used for fixing things quickly without climbing down each time. More than once, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something walking along the top of the catwalk. At first, I thought it was one of the other mechanics, but when I turned my head fully to look, no one was there. It was always a dark shape, almost like a shadow of a person. It moved fast and smooth, like someone pacing back and forth. I was not the only one who saw it. The other mechanics saw it too. In fact, almost everyone who worked back there saw it at some point. We tried to tell ourselves that it was just our eyes playing tricks on us. The lights in the back flickered sometimes, and shadows shifted whenever someone bowled. We told ourselves that the noise and low light made us imagine things. But deep down, none of us really believed that. When you see the same thing again and again, and multiple people see it too, you start to wonder. Still, the shadow was not the scariest thing I experienced there. One night, near closing time, I was working alone. The bowling alley had already shut down for the night. All the customers were gone, the lights were off in the front, and everything was quiet. The machines were off, and the building felt empty. When you are alone in a place that is usually full of people, you feel a strange pressure in the air, like the whole building is holding its breath. I did not have a key to the building. Only the day manager had one. At night, I would lock the door behind me and leave, and the morning manager would come in to open up. So once everything was shut down, I grabbed my things and walked toward the exit. I locked the door behind me and stepped out into the parking lot. The night air felt cool and calm. I walked toward my car, ready to go home and relax. Then, just as I reached my car door, I heard something that made my whole body freeze. I heard bowling. I didn't hear something small or soft. I heard a bowling ball rolling down a lane. I heard it hit the pins. I heard the crash of pins falling over. It was loud, clear, and real. I turned around and stared at the building in shock. The doors to the bowling alley were glass, so you could see straight through to the lanes. The lights inside were off, except for the emergency lights. I could see every lane. I could see the entire space. No one was inside. But the sound of bowling continued. At first I thought maybe someone forgot to leave. Maybe someone had come back in. Maybe the manager was still inside. But that was impossible because I had locked the door behind me, and no one else had a key to get in. I stood there like a statue for 2 full minutes. My mind kept trying to make sense of the noise. I stared through the glass doors, watching the lanes, waiting to see someone walk by or something move. There was nothing, just the sound of a ball hitting the wood, rolling down the lane and knocking over pins, over and over. My heartbeat started pounding so hard that I felt it in my throat. A cold feeling spread through my chest. I knew I needed to leave. Every instinct in my body told me to run, so I did. I got into my car as fast as I could and drove away, hands shaking on the steering wheel. The next morning, after barely sleeping, I called the mechanic who worked the day shift. I asked him calmly, trying not to sound crazy, whether any of the pin setters were running when he arrived. He said no, everything was off. Nothing had been turned on, nothing was moving. So I told him what I heard the night before. I expected him to laugh or tell me I was imagining things. Instead, he said something that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Oh yeah," he said casually, "that's happened to me a few times. It's the damnedest thing, isn't it?" He said it like it was no big deal, like it was normal, like the sound of empty lanes bowling themselves in the middle of the night was something he had learned to ignore. I didn't know what to say, so I just hung up the phone. After that night, I never heard the bowling sounds again. But the feeling of being watched never left me. Whenever I walked through the back area, especially when I was alone, I could feel eyes on me. It was not a sharp feeling, not like someone staring from behind a door. It was more like a slow pressure on the back of my neck, like something standing far away but still aware of me. Sometimes it felt like the air itself was paying attention. The strange part was that nothing else dramatic ever happened. No objects moved by themselves. No voices whispered my name. No machines turned on without reason. But that steady, heavy feeling of being watched was constant. It made even normal nights feel uncomfortable. I learned to act like nothing bothered me, but inside I was always alert, waiting for something to happen. Working at that bowling alley was creepy, but it wasn't all bad. I met good friends there, and the relaxed parts of the job were fun. I miss the silly things like playing video games in the back or laughing with co-workers during slow hours. But even with all the good parts, I can still feel that strange heaviness in the air when I think about that place. I can still see the black figure moving on the catwalk out of the corner of my eye. I can still hear the sound of bowling in an empty building. Some jobs stay with you because of the people you worked with. Some stay with you because of what you learned. And some stay with you because the building itself feels alive in a way that you cannot explain. A way that makes you think twice about turning off the lights and walking away. Even now, years later, I still wonder what really happened in that bowling alley. I still wonder what we all saw walking across the catwalk and what made the lanes come alive in the dark. And sometimes late at night, when I hear a distant thump or a rolling sound, my mind goes back to that quiet parking lot and that impossible noise echoing from inside the building. I was living with a couple who had just become new parents. They had a tiny baby, only 1 or 2 months old at the time, and all 3 of us lived on the second floor of the house. Each of us had our own bedroom, and even though the place wasn't very big, it felt cozy. At night, everything usually stayed quiet, except for the baby crying from time to time, but even that became normal after a while. We were all tired people sharing the same space, and most nights passed without anything strange. One night, though, something happened that I still remember clearly because of how sudden and terrifying it sounded. I think it was around 2 or 3 in the morning. I had been asleep for a long time already, in the deep part of my sleep where my body felt heavy and warm, and the room around me felt so still. The whole house was dark, the kind of dark where you can't even see your own hand unless your eyes adjust. Then, out of nowhere, I heard my roommate scream. At first I thought it was part of a dream. The sound didn't make sense. It was loud, sharp, and full of fear. But within a second, I realized it wasn't a dream. It was real. He was screaming from the top of his lungs like something horrible was happening right in front of him. It was not a normal scream. It wasn't someone shouting because they were surprised or frustrated. It was a scream filled with pure terror, the kind that makes your heart stop for a moment and makes your brain freeze because you don't know if you should run or hide. He screamed like that for a good 30 seconds straight, and each second felt longer than the last. After about 5 or 10 seconds, I heard his wife start screaming too, and then the baby, the tiny newborn, began crying loudly. All 3 voices mixed together into this horrible sound that filled the whole house. It was so sudden and so intense that I jumped up from my bed without even thinking. I didn't grab a shirt, I didn't grab pants, I didn't grab anything. I was just in my boxers, standing there in the dark of my room, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. My heart was racing. I ran into the hallway, the floor cold under my feet. The hall light was off, so everything was lit, only by the faint glow from the streetlights outside, shining through the blinds. I walked toward their bedroom door, slowly trying to decide what I should do. I didn't know if something dangerous was happening. I didn't know if someone had broken in, or if they needed help, or if I would walk in on something terrible. I stood outside their door, listening. The screaming had stopped completely. That was the strange part. It didn't fade out or turn into crying. It just stopped all at once, like someone flipped a switch and turned off all the sound in the house. For a moment, the silence felt even worse than the screaming. I stood there, shaking a little, trying to figure out what to say. I didn't want to walk in on them without knocking, but I also didn't want to knock too loud in case something serious was happening. So I managed to whisper a weak little sentence, my voice barely working. "Shit, guys, are you okay in there?" For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard movement, fumbling noises like someone trying to sit up or grab something in the dark. I heard a soft curse, the kind someone says when they're confused and scared at the same time. Then my roommate finally answered. "It was just a bad dream," he said. His voice was tired and shaky. "Go back to bed." I remember standing there for a few more seconds, trying to decide if he was telling the truth or if something else was wrong. But after hearing more quiet movement and after the baby slowly calmed down, I believed him enough to return to my room. I lay back in my bed, but it took a long time to fall asleep because my body kept replaying those screams in my mind. I had never heard anything like that from a grown man before. It didn't sound like someone having a small nightmare. It sounded like someone who believed they were living through something real and terrible. The next day, things were quiet in the house. Everyone was tired. They looked pale, like they barely slept. I didn't want to bring it up right away, but eventually I asked what happened. I wasn't expecting much, maybe just a quick explanation. But what he told me made the whole situation make more sense, and also made it even scarier. He said he had one of those dreams that felt too real, not just a normal nightmare, a dream where you feel awake, where you feel like you actually got out of bed and walked around. In his dream, he said he woke up because he was thirsty. He went downstairs to get a glass of water. Everything in the dream looked exactly like the real house. The hallway, the kitchen, the dim lights, all of it. Then he walked back to the bedroom. When he looked over at the crib, he saw his baby lying there with no movement, no sound, no breathing. In the dream, the baby was dead. He said that the moment he saw it, he felt something break inside him. He said he grabbed the baby in his dream and screamed because his brain believed it completely. He felt every bit of the fear, the sadness, the shock. He screamed from the deepest part of himself, and that scream came out in real life too. His wife woke up from hearing him scream, saw him in that state, and started screaming too. The baby, confused and frightened by the chaos, started crying loudly. It all happened so fast that he didn't even realize he was dreaming until after the screaming stopped and he saw the baby was alive and perfectly fine. He said he sat there shaking for a long time after waking up. His wife held the baby close and cried quietly. Neither of them could fall asleep again for the rest of the night. For the next couple of weeks, they both looked exhausted. They jumped at small noises. They checked on the baby constantly. Every time the baby made even the smallest sound, they both rushed over to him. It was like the dream stuck to them. Even though they knew it wasn't real, the fear of losing their child had sunk deep into their minds. They couldn't shake it off easily. The baby, thankfully, was healthy and fine. Nothing was wrong with him. But the memory of that night stayed with all of us. I still remember how their screams sounded. There was something raw in them, something I had never heard from adults before. It was a kind of fear that only comes from thinking you've lost something you love more than anything else in the world. Living with them after that felt different for a little while. There was no tension between us, but the house felt heavier, like everyone was being gentler with each other than before. The nights felt a little quieter. Everyone slept with their doors cracked open. They kept a small nightlight glowing in their room for comfort. Even I found myself waking up sometimes in the middle of the night, listening for anything unusual just in case. After a few weeks, things slowly went back to normal. The couple smiled more, the baby laughed more, and the house felt warm again. But I never forgot that night, the way terror can enter a room without warning, the way a dream can feel more real than reality. And I never forgot how fragile people become when their deepest fears try to trick them into believing something terrible has happened. Even now, years later, I sometimes think about how real dreams can feel, especially the ones that hit the deepest fears we don't talk about during the day. I think about how he screamed, how she screamed, and how I stood outside their door not knowing what I might find if I opened it. It reminds me that sometimes the scariest experiences are not ghosts or shadows or strange noises in the night. Sometimes the scariest thing is our own mind, the way it can convince us, even for a moment, that we have lost something we love. And sometimes that brief moment is enough to haunt you long after the dream is gone. I was hanging out at my friend's house like I had done 100 times before. He lived right behind a church, and part of his backyard touched the back of the church's parking lot. It wasn't an exciting backyard, just some grass, a few trees, and a nice fire ring where we usually sat at night talking about life, school, girlfriends, and all the random things people talk about when they're young and the night feels endless. The church parking lot behind his house was simple too. There was a small shed in one corner and a big dumpster under a tall light pole. During the day, it was just a normal church parking lot, but at night it felt empty and strange, especially after the lights turned off. The woods behind the church were thick, dark, and silent, and when the wind blew, the trees made a soft, whispering sound. I used to think nothing of it, but on certain nights that backyard could feel a little creepy if you let your imagination run wild. That night, we were sitting by the fire. It was nearly 2 a.m, and the fire had burned down low. The flames were small, mostly glowing red coals with just a little flicker here and there. The air smelled like smoke and grass. Everything was quiet, no cars, no people, no sounds except the soft popping of the dying fire and the distant chirping of a few crickets that hadn't gone silent yet. We were getting ready to go inside when something caught our attention. It wasn't a loud sound or anything dramatic. It was just a bit of movement at the edge of our vision, the kind of thing you notice without fully understanding what you're seeing at first. Both of us turned our heads at almost the exact same time. There was a girl walking along the side of the church, slowly moving toward the parking lot. She looked like a teenager, maybe 16 or 17 years old. Her head was tilted downward and her long hair fell forward, covering most of her face. The lights in the parking lot had turned off hours earlier, but there was a faint glow from a distant street lamp, and the tiny bit of light from our fire reached her, just enough that we could see her shape. She had a plastic shopping bag in one hand. The other hand hung loosely at her side. My friend and I stopped talking instantly. Her being there was strange. The town we lived in shut down early. Almost everyone was home by 11 p.m. on any night, even weekends. People didn't just wander around behind churches at 2 a.m. But she wasn't running, wasn't crying, wasn't acting drunk or lost. She walked like she had a purpose, even if it was a slow and quiet one. We watched her carefully, not wanting to move or call out. Something about her made us feel like speaking would be wrong. It wasn't that she looked dangerous, it was just odd. Her movements were too calm for the time and place. Her head stayed down, her hair covering her face completely. She didn't seem to notice us at all, even though we were sitting by a fire maybe 40 or 50 feet away from her in plain sight. We kept waiting for her to look up, to react, to maybe see us and wave or smile or ask for help. But she didn't look anywhere except at the ground in front of her feet. We watched as she walked straight to the dumpster. She didn't pause or look around. She just moved behind it, the plastic bag still in her hand. As soon as she disappeared behind the metal box, we both leaned forward a little, trying to listen for any sound. There was nothing. No footsteps, no rustling, no bag being opened or tossed. Just complete silence. We waited. A minute passed, then another. The fire crackled softly and the smell of burning wood drifted between us. The longer she stayed behind the dumpster, the stranger the whole thing felt. If she was throwing something away, it would have taken only a few seconds. But she stayed there for 5 minutes, then 10. My friend whispered, "What the hell is she doing back there?" I didn't have an answer. My mind started going through every possible explanation, but nothing made sense. She wasn't looking for something. She never bent down or moved around. She didn't seem to be hiding anything. She didn't seem scared. She didn't seem rushed. She didn't even seem aware of the world around her. Finally, almost exactly 10 minutes after she walked behind the dumpster, she came back out. No rush, no panic, no hesitation, just the same slow, calm walk. But now the plastic bag was gone. She didn't have anything in her hands anymore. She walked past the dumpster, back across the parking lot, and toward the road. She never looked at us, not even once. Her long hair still covered her face, and her head stayed down. We watched her quietly until she disappeared from view. As soon as she was gone, the air around us felt different, heavier somehow, like a pressure had been lifted, but something still didn't feel right. My friend looked at me and I looked at him, both of us waiting for the other to explain what we had just seen. We didn't have words yet, so we laughed awkwardly and made a few dark jokes about what she might have been doing back there. Something about a baby, something about the kind of stories kids tell to scare each other. But our jokes didn't feel like jokes. They made us more uneasy, not less. The truth was simple. Whatever she was doing behind that dumpster for 10 minutes at 2 o'clock in the morning did not feel normal. And the fact that she never looked at us, even though we were sitting right there with a fire glowing, made everything worse. We debated going behind the dumpster to check, but it was too dark, too quiet, and honestly, too creepy. Neither of us wanted to walk across that parking lot after what we had just seen. So we went inside instead, and the whole time we kept looking, over our shoulders toward the back door, half expecting to see her standing outside the window. I didn't walk home that night. I usually walked home because I lived only a few streets away. But after seeing that girl, there was no way I was walking through that dark church parking lot alone. I slept on my friend's couch, and even inside the house, I felt uneasy. The next day, when the sun was bright and everything felt normal again, we decided to go behind the dumpster to see if there was anything there. Maybe trash on the ground, maybe a bag, maybe something that would explain what she had been doing. We walked over cautiously in the daylight, our fear replaced by curiosity. There was nothing there. No bag, no trash, no object, no sign that anyone had been standing there at all. The ground looked exactly the same as it always did. Just dirt, a few leaves, and a stray cup someone had dropped weeks earlier. We stood there for a few minutes looking around, but the more we looked, the more confusing the whole thing felt. If she had thrown away the bag, it should have been inside the dumpster or somewhere nearby. But there was absolutely nothing. We still talk about that night, even now. Every once in a while, we bring it up and ask the same question. What was she doing back there for 10 minutes? And why didn't she ever look at us? I still will not walk through that parking lot at night. Even if I'm just passing by or heading somewhere close, I take the long way around. I avoid the church at night completely. Something about that girl, the way she moved, the way she never looked up, the way the darkness seemed to follow her, stays in my memory like a shadow I can't shake. I don't know who she was. I don't know what was in that bag. I don't know why she was there at that hour, but the feeling I had that night, the cold confusion in my chest, the way the world suddenly felt wrong for a few minutes, I won't forget that. And I still wonder every time I think about it, what did we really see that night? And what was she doing behind that dumpster in the dark? Sorry to interrupt. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Shadow Archives for daily true horror content that will haunt your dreams and keep you wondering what lurks in the shadows. And don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story when the darkness calls out to you. When I was a kid, I honestly believed the house I grew up in was haunted. Not just spooky or old, but really, truly haunted in a way that stayed with me for years. My childhood mind did not understand how sound worked, or how houses settle, or how temperature changes make wood move. All I understood was that strange things happened in that house, things that made my imagination fill the empty spaces with shadows and monsters. And looking back now, even as an adult, I still remember that house with a strange mix of fear and curiosity. One of the biggest reasons I thought the house was haunted was because of the old door that led from the main hallway into the garage. That door was strange. It had a very old spring-loaded hinge, older than anything else in the house. When the door moved even a little, the hinge made a long, slow creaking sound, almost like a sigh. The sound stretched out in a way that made it feel alive. The door almost never stayed fully closed. Its natural position was to sit partly open, about 3 inches, as if the garage was gently pulling it inward. The house itself was not modern or fancy. It made noises all the time. At night, the floorboards creaked, sometimes softly, sometimes loudly, even when everyone was asleep. Pipes clunked inside the walls. The wind sometimes made the windows shake just a little. But the door to the garage, that was the thing that scared me the most. Even during the day, I could hear it slowly creaking open a little more, then settling back again, then moving again. It was like the garage was breathing in slow, tired breaths. In, creak, out, creak, over and over. When I was alone upstairs in my room, the sounds always got to me. My room was at the far end of the hall, and the door to the garage was down the stairs, but somehow the sound still reached me. It echoed faintly through the house. Sometimes I would be reading or drawing or playing with toys and suddenly freeze because I felt like I wasn't alone. I would feel a tiny pressure on the back of my neck, the feeling that someone was staring at me, not just watching but waiting. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I sometimes saw something. Just a hint, just a shape, never clear. It looked like a head with long moving shapes around it, like snakes instead of hair. The closest thing my child brain could compare it to was Medusa from the stories my parents used to tell me. The snakes didn't move much, but the shape felt alive, like it was floating there, half hidden, watching. Whenever I saw it, I froze immediately. I never turned my head toward it. I never tried to look at it directly. I was terrified that if I looked at it straight on, I would see something real, something that would never leave my mind again. So I always pretended I hadn't seen anything. I would keep my eyes down on my toys or books or hands, pretending everything was normal, even though my heart was beating so hard it felt like it might break my rib cage. The house also made other sounds that scared me. Sometimes I heard a loud step on the floorboards, like someone put their full weight on that one spot. It wasn't a soft noise. It was sharp and clear, the kind of sound that only happens when someone steps on a weak board that bends under their foot. Except no one else was there. Everyone else was asleep or downstairs. Sometimes I even checked the hallway to see if someone had walked past my room, but there was never anyone there. One day, something happened that made every fear in my mind explode at once. I was in my room reading a book when I heard a sudden clunk. Not a soft one, a heavy one. It sounded like something dropped or something hit the floor. My heart immediately jumped. I sat frozen on my bed, staring at the doorway, waiting to hear another sound. I could feel my pulse in my ears. My room felt smaller, like the walls were pushing in on me. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just sat there and listened. When nothing happened after a few seconds, I jumped up and ran out of the room. My legs moved without waiting for my brain. I just needed to get away from that corner where the Medusa head liked to appear. I dashed down the stairs, almost tripping, and ran into the room downstairs where my aquarium was. I kept different tropical fish in it, colorful little things that swam around slowly under the warm lights. That room felt safe to me because I had never seen anything strange there. The ghost, if it was a ghost, only seemed to appear when I was upstairs. I stood in front of the aquarium watching the fish drift around. The soft bubbles rising inside the tank made a peaceful sound. The glow from the tank lit up the room just enough that I didn't feel trapped in the dark. I tried to convince myself that whatever I heard was something normal. Houses make noise, people hear things. Maybe something had fallen in the garage. But then I remembered that the garage door was right next to this room. The thin wall between us didn't feel comforting. Instead, I felt even less safe. I could hear the creaking sound again, very slow, the same breathing pattern I hated so much. In, creak, out, creak. I stared at the aquarium, hoping the sounds would fade, but the creaking grew louder in my ears, like the garage was trying to pull my attention toward it. Then a cold feeling started crawling up my spine. It didn't start at the bottom, it started in the middle of my back and spread upward and outward, like icy fingers trying to grip my shoulders. I stopped breathing for a moment. My whole body stiffened. I didn't want to turn around. Something deep inside me kept saying, "Don't turn around, don't look, don't move." But I couldn't ignore the sensation that something was behind me. The room was quiet, except for the bubbling sound of the fish tank and the soft creak from the garage door. My chest felt tight. My breathing turned shallow. I kept staring at the little fish drifting through the water, swimming peacefully in their tiny world, while I stood frozen in mine. I don't know how long I stood there like that, maybe 10 seconds, maybe a full minute. It felt much longer. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. This time, it wasn't the Medusa head. This wasn't a floating shape or something blurry. This was a very real shadow, a shadow shaped like a person. It didn't move quickly, it didn't flicker, it just hovered there, solid and dark, right behind me. I didn't turn to look at it straight away. I couldn't. My body was too scared to move. My mind kept telling me it was real this time. Not a trick of light, not a dream, not my imagination. I could feel it behind me, not just see the shape, but feel the presence of something standing at my back, just inches away from the glass door that led outside. My breath became shaky, my hands trembled. I knew that if I turned around, something terrible might happen. My imagination filled in the details before my eyes did. I thought of monsters. I thought of ghosts. I imagined a face with hollow eyes staring at me. My heart started pounding so hard I felt dizzy. Then the shadow moved, not by gliding or floating. It moved in a way that unmistakably belonged to something real. And then, out of nowhere, there was a loud knock on the glass door. It wasn't a gentle knock. It wasn't polite. It was a strong, firm, "I am right here" kind of knock. It echoed through the whole room. I felt the fear spike inside me so sharply that my knees almost gave out. I turned around slowly, terrified of what I would see. And instead of a ghost or a monster or a dark shadow waiting to grab me, it was the gardener. He stood outside the glass door, holding his gloves in one hand. He looked tired and a little annoyed. He knocked again lightly, probably wondering why I hadn't opened the door the first time. He needed someone to unlock the gate to the backyard so he could put some tools away. For a full second, I just stared at him, unable to speak. My heart was still racing so fast that I could barely find my voice. I finally managed to open the door for him, but my hands were still shaking when I reached for the handle. The moment he walked away, everything clicked in my mind. The shadowy figure I had seen was his reflection in the glass. The presence I felt was just my own fear building up until it convinced me something supernatural was happening. The knock that nearly killed me from shock was just him trying to do his job. Even now, I laugh at myself a little when I remember that moment. But when I think about how scared I was as a kid, and how strange the house felt, and how many times I thought something was behind me, I understand why my mind believed it. Sometimes our fears grow bigger in the dark, and the shadows in the corner of our eyes start to feel alive. Sometimes a creaking door becomes a breathing ghost. Sometimes the house we grow up in holds more imagination than truth. And sometimes the scariest moment of your life ends with nothing more than the gardener knocking on a door. When I was younger, our scout troop used to go every summer to a camp near Lake Clendening in Ohio. It was a quiet place surrounded by thick woods, hills, and long dirt trails. The lake was calm, the kind of water that barely moves unless something touches it. The air always smelled like pine trees, smoke from campfires and wet leaves. Every time we went there, I felt like we were stepping into a place that existed outside normal life. The days were full of activities, but the nights were filled with stories. The kind that made you pull your sleeping bag up higher, even on warm evenings. Near the camp, a short hike away, were the remains of an old farm that had belonged to the Clendening family many decades before. You could still see the outline of the stone foundation where the farmhouse once stood, covered in moss now, green and soft like old velvet. We would step around the broken stones, imagining where the walls used to be. The house itself was long gone, burned down over a century ago, but the barn still stood. Its wooden walls leaned a little, but the roof was somehow still intact, as if time had forgotten to finish its work on that single building. If you stood in the barn doorway at dusk, you could see long beams of light coming through cracks in the boards, dust floating in the air like tiny ghosts. The smell was a mix of old wood, dry hay, and earth that had not been disturbed in years. Every scout who visited the camp learned the legend of the Clendening farm. The story went back to the time of the Civil War, when a group of Southern soldiers known as Morgan's Raiders invaded eastern Ohio. They were known for destroying towns and farms, taking supplies, and killing anyone who resisted. When the raiders came close to the Clendening farm, the father and his son decided to go outside to try to protect their family. Some versions of the story said they tried to reason with the raiders. Others said they tried to bribe them. Either way, they hoped they could keep their home and their loved ones safe. Meanwhile, the mother feared the worst. She told her young daughter that everything would be all right, but she must have known deep down that terrible things were coming. She took her daughter to a closet inside the house, put a lantern in her hands so she would not be afraid of the dark, kissed her, and shut the door. The idea was to protect the girl from seeing anything horrible, even if she could not protect her from hearing it. The worst came. The father and son were killed by the raiders. The mother was assaulted and murdered. The house was burned to the ground with the daughter still locked inside the closet, lantern in hand. She never saw what happened to her family. She only knew that she was alone, scared, and surrounded by fire. According to the legend, the girl still walks the grounds around the old Clendening house. She appears at night, her lantern glowing red, stained with her mother's blood, people said, as she searches for her lost mother, father, and brother. Her voice is soft, full of sadness, calling out for the family she never saw again. Every scout heard the story, and every scout believed it a little too much, no matter how old or tough they pretended to be. At the camp, there was always a big scavenger hunt that took place once a week. It involved searching the entire camp and nearby areas for different items. One item that always showed up on the list was a slate tile from the barn at the Clendening house. That meant someone always had to hike through the forest, past the quiet lake and into the dark field where the barn stood. The only time to do it was at night, when there were no planned activities. The older scouts loved this because it gave them a perfect chance to scare the younger ones. It became a tradition, a rite of passage. You went for the tile, and you were almost guaranteed to get the scare of your life. During my last year at the camp, we decided to pull the biggest scare yet. A group of us, all older scouts, secretly rigged a red lantern onto two thin wires stretched between trees. The wires were arranged so that we could pull them from far away, making the lantern swing slowly back and forth like someone walking with it. From a distance, it would look like a floating red light moving through the trees, but if one of the younger scouts tried to run toward it, they would find nobody there. The lantern would move on its own, untouched. We spent hours setting up the wires, tying them to old branches, making sure the lantern didn't make noise when it moved. We tested it again and again, and each time it looked creepier than before. When the night of the scavenger hunt came, we were ready. As expected, the younger scouts went out in groups to find the barn tile. The moment they came within sight of the ruins, we pulled the wires gently. The red lantern started rocking slowly, then swinging a little more, as if someone was walking with it through the trees. The reaction was perfect. We heard the young scouts scream from the field. Some screamed high and loud, others tried to pretend they weren't scared, but failed miserably. They ran all the way back to camp, tripping over roots and branches in the dark. Some didn't stop running until they were near the main fire pit. They talked over each other, trying to explain what they saw, their voices shaking. We older scouts looked at each other and grinned. It was the greatest prank we had ever pulled. We felt proud and mischievous, and full of that wild energy you only feel when you scare someone without hurting them. Once we made sure everyone was accounted for and safely back at camp, we went back to the ruins to take down our setup. The lantern wires were hidden so well that it took some time to untangle them. We packed everything up and started walking back along the trail toward camp. It was a calm night. The trees were tall and still, and the moon lit up the path in soft silver light. The air felt cool, brushing against our skin. We were laughing quietly, feeling good about the prank, when something made me turn around. I don't know why I looked back. Maybe I heard something. Maybe I felt something change in the air. Or maybe it was just instinct. But when I looked over my shoulder, I saw a red light moving slowly through the trees. For a moment, I thought maybe one of us had dropped a lantern or left something behind. But I looked down at my hands. My lantern was right there. I looked at my friends. They all had their lanterns too, and we had packed up the prank lantern. It wasn't this one. The red light was far away, but bright enough that we could see it clearly. It wasn't swinging wildly. It wasn't bouncing. It was moving with a strange, slow rhythm, almost like someone walking and holding it by their side. A cold breeze touched the back of my neck, and I immediately felt goosebumps rise along my arms. Something didn't feel right. Something felt wrong in a heavy, slow way, like the air was pressing down on us. I told the others to look. One of them turned around, saw the red light, and whispered, "Holy shit." We all stood there frozen for a moment, squinting through the trees, trying to see if there was a person behind it. There was no shape, no figure, just the red light moving closer, one slow step at a time. Then we heard it, a whisper coming from the direction of the light, soft and fragile. A single word carried by the wind. "Mother?" It didn't sound like a joke. It didn't sound like a person trying to scare us. It sounded sad, lost, confused, like someone searching for someone they would never find. That was all it took. We ran. None of us talked. None of us slowed down. None of us even looked back. We ran until our legs felt shaky and our lungs burned. We ran until we reached the camp, burst through the trees, and collapsed near the fire pit. We threw more wood on the fire and kept the flames high the entire night. Some of us stayed awake until the sun came up. Nobody wanted to close their eyes. The story, the real story, not the prank, became something we didn't laugh about. And that night was the last time I ever walked out to the Clendening House ruins. Even now, years later, whenever I think about that glowing red light drifting through the trees and that soft whisper reaching out to us, a cold shiver runs across my skin. We went out there to scare others, but the land, and whatever still walks it, reminded us that some stories stay alive long after the people in them are gone. Last month, something strange started happening to me, something I had never experienced before in my life. It began softly, almost like a dream that followed me even when I was awake. I started having visions of people I loved, people who had passed away long ago. The first time it happened, I thought maybe I was just tired, but then it kept happening, and each time it felt a little more real. The visions always involved the same three people: my mother's father, my father's father, and a close family friend who had been like an uncle to us. All three of them were gone. All three of them had been important people in my life when I was younger, and suddenly, without any warning, they were appearing in front of me in quick flashes, like the world around me froze for a second and something else stepped in. My mother's father, my grandfather, was the only one who actually spoke in the visions. He would say something to me, but I could never understand the words. They were always blurry, like hearing someone talk underwater. His mouth moved. His expression looked serious, almost urgent, but the message never came through clearly. My father's father stood beside him silently. The family friend stood behind them both. None of them looked angry or sad. They were just there, watching me, waiting for me to understand something. Each vision lasted only a moment, maybe a second or two at most, but it always left me shaken. I would blink, and suddenly everything would be normal again. The world would snap back into place. I tried to ignore it every time, telling myself it was just stress or my imagination or maybe even daydreaming. I didn't want to think too hard about it because the idea of seeing spirits, especially people I had loved, felt too heavy and confusing. The last time the vision happened was February 15th. I remember the date clearly because later I would think about it again and again. My grandfather's face appeared for a second, his lips moving, his eyes fixed on me. I tried to listen harder than I ever had before, but still I couldn't understand what he was saying. When the vision faded, I shook my head and tried to move on with my day, pushing down the strange feeling in my stomach. 2 days after that, everything in my life changed. I was driving on a normal afternoon. The sky was clear, the roads were busy enough, and I was thinking about the usual things: work, errands, what I needed to do later. I wasn't speeding, I wasn't distracted. I was just driving like any normal person does every day of their life. I remember glancing in the rearview mirror and noticing a car behind me. Nothing strange, nothing unusual. But then everything happened at once. Out of nowhere, a driver going more than 50 miles per hour slammed into the back of my car. I didn't even have time to process what was happening. The impact was so violent that my entire body jolted forward, and my car was shoved towards the crosswalk, where a pedestrian was walking. My head flew toward the steering wheel, and for a split second I thought, this is it. I'm going to hit him. I'm going to kill someone. I'm going to get seriously hurt. But right then, something impossible happened. In the exact moment before my face hit the steering wheel, I suddenly had a vision. Not a memory, not a dream, not imagination, a real vision. I saw myself sitting in the passenger seat, watching my own head slam into the steering wheel. It was like my mind stepped outside my body and showed me what was about to happen. It happened so fast, but somehow I saw every detail clearly. The vision lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt like I had been watching it for several seconds. My brain snapped back to my body instantly, and the moment I returned to myself, my hands reacted before I even thought about it. I grabbed the steering wheel tightly and pushed my upper body back as hard as I could, keeping my face away from the wheel. At the same time, I slammed my foot on the brake with all my strength. Everything slowed down. The world didn't move in real time anymore. I felt the force of the accident, the weight of the impact, the pain shooting through my neck, the shaking of the car. But my mind was so strangely calm, focused only on stopping the car before I hit the pedestrian. Hours seemed to pass in those few seconds. My chest kept trying to slam forward into the wheel, but something held me back. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't just my arms. It felt like hands, not mine, holding me, supporting me, keeping me away from the steering wheel. I fought against the car's movement, pushing back with every bit of strength I had. And then the car stopped. Not a few feet away, not a yard away. Inches, just inches from the pedestrian's legs. If my car had moved forward even a tiny bit more, I would have hit him. He didn't even fully understand what had happened. He looked shocked, confused. I was gripping the steering wheel so hard that my fingers hurt. My breath came out in sharp gasps. My whole body was trembling. When the car finally stopped rolling, I somehow managed to reach out, put the car in park, and shut off the engine. Then everything I had been holding inside came out all at once. I began screaming, not because of pain, but because of the shock, the fear, the realization of how close everything had come to turning into the worst moment of my life. People ran toward my car. Someone called an ambulance. Someone else tried to calm me down. I couldn't stop shaking. I couldn't stop thinking about the pedestrian, about the car behind me, about the vision I had seen just seconds before the crash. When the emergency workers checked me, they were surprised. I was shaken, emotionally overwhelmed, and scared out of my mind. But I wasn't badly injured. I had severe whiplash, yes. My neck hurt badly and my muscles were tight, but I hadn't hit my head. I hadn't broken anything. I hadn't slammed into the wheel the way I was supposed to. My car, however, was completely totaled. The front was smashed from the sudden braking and the force of the movement. The back was crushed from being hit so hard. When I got out and looked at it, I knew that the situation should have been worse. Much worse. I should have been hurt. The pedestrian should have been hurt. Someone should have been taken to the hospital. But none of that happened. Later that night, after everything settled down and my family sat with me to make sure I was okay, my dad looked at me in a serious, quiet way. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. "It was your grandfather's watching over you," he said calmly. At first, I didn't even respond. I just stared at him, trying to understand what he meant. Then I told him about the visions I had been having for the last month. I told him about how I saw my grandfathers and the family friends standing together. I told him how my mother's father tried to speak to me. I told him how the visions stopped 2 days before the accident. My mother looked at me with wide eyes, her mouth slightly open. My grandmother covered her mouth with her hand and whispered something under her breath. My father leaned back in his chair, processing what I had said. There was no laughter, no disbelief, no telling me I was imagining things. Just shock and understanding and something like respect. We talked about the accident again, about how fast the other driver had been going, about how close I was to hitting the pedestrian. And as we talked, something settled over all of us. A quiet, heavy realization. If I hadn't been driving that day, the pedestrian would have been killed. If I hadn't reacted instantly, I would have been seriously injured. If I hadn't seen that split-second vision, I would not have pushed myself away from the wheel in time. And if something hadn't held me back, something I still cannot explain, I would have been thrown forward hard enough to cause real damage. I was saved. Someone else was saved. And I did not do it alone. Even now, when I think about that moment, I feel a cold shiver run through me. Not out of fear, out of awe, out of gratitude, out of the strange realization that sometimes the people we love don't leave us completely. Sometimes they return, not in dreams or memories, but in moments when we need them most. My vision stopped after the accident. I haven't seen my grandfathers or the family friends since, but the last vision I saw, me watching myself crash, played out exactly when it needed to, and I don't believe that was an accident, not anymore, because someone prevented my head from hitting the wheel. Someone helped me fight the force I couldn't fight alone. Someone guided my reactions when I didn't even understand what I was doing. Someone made sure that the pedestrian walked away unharmed, and I know who those someones were. I haven't had another vision since that day. Maybe I never will. Maybe they came only for that one moment when everything depended on it. But I know, deep inside myself, that I wasn't alone in that car, and I will never forget it. One of the very first jobs I ever had as a teenager was working as a stockboy at a department store downtown. I was 16, maybe 17, and excited just to earn a paycheck. The job wasn't glamorous, but it felt grown up. I worked afternoons and evenings during the school week and full days on weekends. Most of the time, the work was simple: unloading shipments, stocking shelves, sweeping floors when needed. It was the kind of job that made you tired but gave you a weird sense of pride. The store stayed open late on Fridays until 9 at night, and on those evenings the building always felt different. During the day it buzzed with customers, voices, music playing softly overhead, and smells from the little snack bar near the entrance. But at night everything slowed down. The crowds thinned. The employees started thinking about going home, and the store got quieter and quieter until only a few people wandered the aisles. One Friday night, close to closing time, a sales clerk asked me to go to the warehouse and bring back a small wrought iron patio set for a customer. These patio sets came in big cardboard boxes that were heavier than they looked, so we moved them with a hand truck. I didn't mind. It was just another task to finish before clocking out. The department store itself was located in a very old building, built not long after the turn of the century. You could see the age if you knew where to look. The front of the store, the shopping floors, looked updated and bright. But behind the scenes, everything felt older. The wiring was old. The walls had strange bumps from years of remodeling, and the back rooms had that heavy, musty smell you only find in forgotten corners of old buildings. It smelled like dust, wood, and time. The warehouse wasn't attached to the store. It was a separate building behind the store, across a narrow alley that customers never saw. This warehouse was even older than the store. It was made of concrete, brick walls, and steel roof beams. The windows were small and reinforced with wire, the kind you couldn't open, and so dirty they barely let in daylight. Even during the day, the place felt dim, like the light was too tired to reach every corner. I grabbed a hand truck in the back room, checked my pocket for the warehouse key, and pushed open the back door that led to the loading dock. The metal door groaned loudly as it opened, and as soon as I stepped outside, the cold evening air hit me. The alley was narrow, shadowy, and smelled faintly of oil and rain-soaked concrete. My footsteps echoed as I walked down the loading ramp and moved toward the warehouse door. The warehouse door was tall and metal, with a heavy lock that always felt like it belonged on a prison rather than a job site. I unlocked it, pulled it open, and stepped inside. The smell inside was even stronger than the store's back rooms. Dusty, stale, old air trapped for decades. I felt along the inner wall until I found the old light switch, the kind with a metal plate that clacked loudly when you flipped it. A few light bulbs hanging from the high ceiling flickered to life. Most didn't turn on at all. The warehouse had 3 floors. The first floor was open space filled with large shipments. The patio furniture I needed was on the second floor, so I walked toward the freight elevator to ride up. The elevator, like everything else, was old. It had tall metal gates that you had to slide open and closed by hand, and inside was a wooden floor worn smooth from decades of use. When I reached the elevator, I saw the gates on the first floor were closed, but the elevator wasn't there. I could see the cables stretching upward into the darkness. The elevator was on the top floor. No big deal, I thought, and pressed the down button. But instead of the motor starting, I heard the bell ring. A short, sharp ding. That bell meant something very specific. A gate somewhere wasn't closed. The elevator couldn't move unless all the safety gates on every floor were shut tightly. It was company policy, an important one, and every employee knew it. It annoyed me because someone hadn't followed the rules. It meant I had to climb the stairs to the third floor, close the gates myself, and ride the elevator back down. The stairwell was dark and narrow, but I'd gone up and down it 100 times before. Still, the steps creaked more than usual that night. When I reached the third floor, I found exactly what I expected. Both gates, the one outside the elevator and the one inside, were wide open. Wide open, which made no sense because I knew for a fact that nobody else was working that night. The warehouse was only used for storage after hours, not for active work. I stepped inside the elevator, slid the gates shut, and rode it back to the first floor. The old machine groaned and rattled as it moved, as if it didn't appreciate being woken up. Once I reached the bottom, I loaded my hand truck, rode back up to the second floor, and walked down the aisles to find the correct box. The warehouse aisles felt endless, with huge shelves towering over me on both sides. Shadows stretched across the floor because the light bulbs were too far apart. I found the box I needed, turned it so I could slide the hand truck under it, and bent down to lift one edge. That was when I heard it. The sound of the elevator gates closing, metal sliding against metal, followed immediately by the sound of the elevator motor kicking on. The elevator was going back up. I froze. I felt a vibration through the floor. For a moment, my brain tried to convince itself that I must have left the gates open by accident, but I knew I hadn't. I remembered the weight of the gate in my hands, the loud clack when it shut. I stepped into the aisle and peeked toward the elevator. The platform was rising. There was no one inside it. My heart picked up speed. How did the gates close by themselves? I walked over to the elevator shaft and pressed the down button again. The bell rang. That meant the gates on the third floor were open again. Impossible. Something inside me twisted. A cold feeling slipped up my back. I took the stairs again, a little faster this time, and found the gates wide open, just like before. I closed them again, rode the elevator back down, and returned to the box I needed. My hands were shaking a little, but I didn't want to admit I was scared. It was an old building. Old buildings did weird things. At least, that's what I told myself. But as soon as I went back to the aisle, the same thing happened. The elevator gates slammed shut. The motor hummed. The elevator climbed back up. I felt a deep chill inside my stomach. This wasn't normal. The gates were completely manual. They couldn't close on their own. There was no automatic mechanism. The elevator couldn't run unless someone physically shut the gates. And I knew without a doubt that I was the only living person in the warehouse. I climbed the stairs again, now breathing harder, partly from effort and partly from fear. Once again, both gates were wide open when I reached the top. I didn't ride the elevator this time. I had had enough. I blocked the gate with a box so it couldn't close, grabbed the hand truck, and practically rushed out of the warehouse. Every step I took echoed loudly. The warehouse felt like it was listening, like the air itself had changed. Back at the store, after the customer left with the patio set, I told the sales clerk what happened. She was an older woman who had worked there for more than 30 years. She had gray hair pulled into a bun, glasses on the tip of her nose, and a calm way of speaking. Nothing seemed to surprise her. When I finished the story, she nodded slowly and said, "Oh, you met Boyd." I stared at her. "Boyd? Who is Boyd?" She looked at me with a tired expression, as if she had been expecting this moment. "Boyd was our warehouseman after World War II, she said. "He worked there for nearly 20 years. Nice man, quiet man. One day he was working on the third floor near the elevator shaft. The elevator was down on the first floor. The safety gate failed and went up by itself. He didn't see it happen. He stepped backward and fell 3 floors. He died on top of the elevator car below. I felt every hair on my arms rise. She continued. Ever since then, strange things happen, mostly in the warehouse, but sometimes here in the store too. Doors opening, lights turning on, things moving by themselves. People hear footsteps. Been going on 8 or 10 years now. It's just Boyd. He still walks around. I left the store in silence. My hands felt cold. My thoughts were racing. I kept replaying the sound of those elevator gates slamming shut, the way the empty elevator rose on its own, the feeling of someone nearby. By the time school ended that year, I asked to transfer to a daytime position. I didn't want to work nights anymore, and I never went into that warehouse by myself again. Even now, when I think about Boyd, I can almost hear the soft sound of a metal gate sliding shut on its own in an empty building. When I was a kid, I honestly believed the house I grew up in was haunted. Not just spooky or old, but really, truly haunted in a way that stayed with me for years. My childhood mind did not understand how sound worked, or how houses settle, or how temperature changes make wood move. All I understood was that strange things happened in that house. Things that made my imagination fill the empty spaces with shadows and monsters. And looking back now, even as an adult, I still remember that house with a strange mix of fear and curiosity. One of the biggest reasons I thought the house was haunted was because of the old door that led from the main hallway into the garage. That door was strange. It had a very old spring-loaded hinge, older than anything else in the house. When the door moved even a little, the hinge made a long, slow creaking sound, almost like a sigh. The sound stretched out in a way that made it feel alive. The door almost never stayed fully closed. Its natural position was to sit partly open, about 3 inches, as if the garage was gently pulling it inward. The house itself was not modern or fancy. It made noises all the time. At night, the floorboards creaked, sometimes softly, sometimes loudly, even when everyone was asleep. Pipes clunked inside the walls. The wind sometimes made the windows shake just a little. But the door to the garage, that was the thing that scared me the most. Even during the day, I could hear it slowly creaking open a little more, then settling back again, then moving again. It was like the garage was breathing in slow, tired breaths. In, creak, out, creak, over and over. When I was alone upstairs in my room, the sounds always got to me. My room was at the far end of the hall, and the door to the garage was down the stairs, but somehow the sound still reached me. It echoed faintly through the house. Sometimes I would be reading or drawing or playing with toys and suddenly freeze because I felt like I wasn't alone. I would feel a tiny pressure on the back of my neck, the feeling that someone was staring at me, not just watching, but waiting. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I sometimes saw something. Just a hint, just a shape, never clear. It looked like a head with long moving shapes around it, like snakes instead of hair. The closest thing my child brain could compare it to was Medusa from the stories my parents used to tell me. The snakes didn't move much, but the shape felt alive, like it was floating there, half hidden, watching. Whenever I saw it, I froze immediately. I never turned my head toward it. I never tried to look at it directly. I was terrified that if I looked at it straight on, I would see something real, something that would never leave my mind again. So I always pretended I hadn't seen anything. I would keep my eyes down on my toys or books or hands, pretending everything was normal, even though my heart was beating so hard it felt like it might break my... That because it meant staying up late, eating junk food, and playing video games until our eyes burned. Their parents didn't mind as long as we were quiet enough not to wake their younger siblings. We set up blankets and pillows in the living room and pushed 2 couches together so we could sit side by side. Eventually, sometime around midnight or later, I fell asleep on one of the couches. The others kept playing for a while. I could still hear the clicking of controllers and soft laughing just before I drifted off. It felt safe and normal, the way sleepovers always do when you're surrounded by friends. The next morning, everything changed. When I woke up, the room felt strangely tense. The kids were looking at me weird. My brother seemed nervous too. They weren't excited about breakfast or video games like usual. They were staring at me like something was wrong. Finally, one of them spoke up. They told me that while I was sleeping, I stood up on the couch. Just stood up out of nowhere. Eyes closed. Not awake. Not responding. I stood there like someone pulled me upward with invisible strings. Then I stood still for a moment, like I was listening to something or waiting for something. Then I walked off the couch. Not carefully. Not like a normal person. Like someone stepping off a ledge without knowing there's a drop. I fell straight to the floor, hit the carpet, got back up, climbed back onto the couch, and went back to sleep. I had no memory of this. I had never sleepwalked in my life. I didn't even talk in my sleep. To hear that I walked off a couch like that terrified me. Kids don't think about medical reasons or sleep disorders. The only thing my mind could think was something made me do that. Something pulled me. Something was there. My friends looked even more afraid now that they had told me. Finally, one of them told me the truth about the room I had hidden in before. Apparently, years earlier, a mother and her young daughter had been murdered in that room. Slaughtered. The way they said it made my stomach twist. They said the room had been sealed for a long time and only recently opened again. They said the energy in the room felt wrong, heavy, dark, and they said if you looked closely enough at the door, you could see what looked like 4 handprints outside, small ones and big ones with red streaks underneath, like something bloody had once slid down the wood. I didn't want to believe them, but when something scares a group of kids that deeply, you can't just ignore it. What freaked me out even more was that none of them ever played near that room. They avoided that end of the hallway completely. They never went upstairs at night. They never went there alone. These were kids who would explore attics, basements, dark closets, and everything else without fear. But that room scared them enough that they warned me the moment they found out I'd been inside it. A week or 2 later, everything got even stranger. Their parents, who were normally calm and skeptical people, called in an exorcist, a real one, a grown man dressed in black carrying equipment I had only ever seen in movies. He climbed into the attic above the room, stayed up there for a long time, and we heard strange chanting and footsteps and things being moved around. We weren't allowed upstairs while he was there. Their parents looked pale and stressed. They kept telling us to stay downstairs, to not play near the hallway, to not open any doors. The whole house felt different while he was there, like the air was thicker and even the walls were listening. When he finally left, he carried himself like someone who had done something important but exhausting. Their parents whispered to him quietly at the door, thanking him. After he left, they stayed quiet for the rest of the evening. The lightness in the house, normally full of noise and laughter, was gone. After that night, everything about the room changed. The door stayed locked. The hallway felt colder. The house didn't feel safe at night anymore, not even when we all slept together in the living room. I avoided the upstairs completely, and I never played hide and seek in that house again. I didn't want to be anywhere near that door. I didn't want to find out if those handprints were real or if something else might follow me the next time I got too close. For a long time afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. I kept imagining myself standing on the couch in the middle of the night, slowly walking off the edge like something was pulling me toward the floor. I wondered if the thing that haunted that room had touched me. I wondered if I had gone into a place I should never have entered. I wondered if the exorcist was there because of me, or because the house had been waiting for a long time to deal with whatever was trapped inside. Even now, years later, the memory still sticks with me. The image of that empty room, the binders on the floor, the pen, the silence, the movement I made while sleeping, the handprints, the exorcist, everything. It was the first time in my life I truly believed in ghosts, and it was the last time I ever went near that room again. It was several months ago when my life changed from a quiet, boring existence into something that feels like a constant state of paranoia. I live in a house that is somewhat isolated, tucked away near a dense line of woods. I have always loved the privacy and the connection to nature. I enjoyed the sound of the wind in the trees and the fact that I didn't have neighbors looking into my windows. My only real companion out there is my cat, a tabby named Milo. He is usually an indoor cat, perfectly content to sleep on the sofa and chase laser pointers, but every time in a while the call of the wild gets to him and he tries to make a break for it. On this particular night, he managed to slip out. I had opened the back door just for a second to put some trash out, and he bolted between my legs like a streak of lightning. By the time I dropped the bag and turned around, he was already gone, disappearing into the tall grass that borders the forest. I wasn't immediately worried. Usually he would just sniff around the porch or hide under the deck, and I could coax him back in with the sound of a shaking treat bag. But this time was different. I stood on the back porch and called his name for 10 minutes, but there was no sign of him. The night was incredibly dark. I looked up and saw that the moon was just a thin crescent, a sliver of silver that offered almost no illumination. The stars were blocked out by a heavy layer of clouds, making the world below feel like it was wrapped in a thick black velvet blanket. I knew I couldn't just leave him out there. The woods around my house are home to coyotes, foxes, and owls, none of which are friendly to a house cat. I sobbed, went back inside to grab my heavy-duty flashlight and my jacket, and stepped out into the yard to find him. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness like a lightsaber, illuminating swirling dust motes and moths that danced in the light. I walked toward the tree line, calling his name softly. I didn't want to yell and scare him further, but the silence of the woods was unnerving. Usually, the forest is full of sounds at night, crickets chirping, frogs croaking, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But tonight it was dead silent. It was as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I stepped into the woods, the dry leaves crunching loudly under my boots. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth and pine needles. I swept the light back and forth, looking for the telltale reflective glint of cat eyes. I had been walking for maybe 15 minutes when I finally saw him. I spotted Milo sitting on top of a fallen log about 20 yards away. His eyes reflected green in the flashlight beam. I felt a wave of relief and started to walk towards him, shaking the bag of treats I had shoved in my pocket. "Come here, buddy," I said in a soothing voice. "Let's go home." But as I got closer, he didn't do his usual happy trot towards me. Instead, he passed away. His ears were pinned back flat against his head, and his tail was puffed up to twice its normal size. He looked disenchanted. I took another step and he bolted. He didn't run toward the house. He ran deeper into the woods. I groaned in frustration and continued the pursuit. I tracked him for another 20 minutes, going deeper into the forest than I usually like to go, especially at night. The trees were getting thicker here, the canopy blocking out what little moonlight there was. Every time I catch up to him, the same thing will happen. I would spot him huddled under a bush or behind a tree, trembling. I would try to approach him slowly, crouching down to look less threatening. But he would just stare past me, his eyes wide with panic, and then take off again. It started to feel strange. Milo knows me. He trusts me. But it was acting like he wasn't scared of me. He was scared of something else. He was scared of something that was out there with us. Finally, we reached a small clearing. I saw Milo crouched low to the ground, his body tense like a coiled spring. I approached him again, pleading with him to just let me pick him up. I was cold, tired, and ready to be back in my warm living room. I got within 5 feet of him and I thought I finally had him. But then he did something that made the hair on my arms stand up. He looked directly over my shoulder, his eyes locking onto something behind me. He let out a low, guttural growl, and then he scrambled. He didn't run away from me this time. He ran past me. He practically scrambled over my boots in his haste to get away, sprinting back in the direction of the house as if the devil himself was chasing him. I stood there for a moment confused. My cat, who had been running away from the house for the last hour, had suddenly decided that home was the safest place to be. I watched him disappear into the darkness, his little body moving faster than I had ever seen. I was now alone in the woods. The silence that had been eerie before now feels heavy and oppressive. I slowly turned around to see what had spooked him so badly. I figured it was maybe a coyote or a stray dog. I swung the beam of my flashlight around, cutting a wide arc through the trees. And then I saw him. There was a man standing there. He was about 30 feet away from me, standing in a small gap between 2 large oak trees. He was absolutely still. He wasn't hiding, really, but he wasn't making his presence known either. He was just standing there like a statue. I froze. My brain tried to process what I was seeing. It is not normal to run into people in these woods, especially not this late at night, and especially not this far from the main road. The beam of my flashlight illuminated him clearly. He looked undeniably human, which was almost more terrifying than if it had been an animal. He had nondescript brown hair, cut in a boring standard style that looked like it could have been from any decade. He was wearing a tweed jacket with patches on the elbows, the kind a history professor might wear. It was completely inappropriate clothing for walking in the woods at night. He looked clean, not like a hiker or a camper. I moved the light up to his face. I could make out all of his features. I saw a nose, a mouth that was set in a straight, emotionless line, and a chin. But when the light hit his eyes, my breath caught in my throat. There were no eyes. Where his eyes should have been, there was just shadow. It wasn't that he had empty sockets like a skeleton. It was more like the light just refused to touch that part of his face. It was a deep, pooling darkness that seemed to absorb the beam of my flashlight. I stood there, paralyzed by a mixture of confusion and fear. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe he was wearing weird sunglasses. I swallowed hard and called out to him, "Hello?" My voice sounded thin and shaky in the quiet woods. "Can I help you?" He didn't respond. He didn't move a muscle. He didn't even blink if he even had eyelids to blink with. He just stood there, facing me, radiating a cold, silent energy. The silence stretched out, becoming unbearable. I felt like I was intruding on something I wasn't supposed to see. I tried to sound braver than I felt. I gripped the flashlight tighter, using it as a weapon in my mind. "I can see you, you know," I said, my voice louder this time. "Stop trying to scare me." I was greeted with absolute silence. The wind didn't blow. The leaves didn't rustle. The man didn't speak. He just exists there in the beam of light, a silent observer in a tweed jacket. A primal instinct kicked in deep in my gut. It was the lizard brain, the part of us that remembers what it was like to be prey. It screams at me to leave. It screamed that this was not a person, or at least not a person I wanted to interact with. I decided to listen to that instinct. I didn't want to turn my back on him, but I needed to get home. I slowly turned my body, keeping the light on him for as long as I could, and then I began to walk back the way I came. I walked briskly, my heart pounding a rhythm against my ribs. I count my steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I couldn't resist the urge to check. I spun around, swinging the flashlight beam back to where I had seen him. My stomach dropped. He was closer. He hadn't made a sound. I hadn't heard footsteps crunching on the dry leaves. I hadn't heard branches breaking, but he had covered at least 10 feet of distance in the few seconds I had my back turned. He was still standing in that exact same pose, arms by his sides, absolutely rigid. It was as if he was a weeping angel from that television show, only moving when he wasn't being observed. But this was real life, and the terror of it washed over me like ice water. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracked. I turned and walked again, faster this time. I was practically speed walking, stumbling, slightly over roots and rocks that I couldn't see. Because my hands were shaking so bad, the flashlight beam was bouncing everywhere. I walked for maybe another 20 seconds. I had to know if he was still coming. I stopped and whipped around again. I didn't see him at first. I scanned the path behind me. Then the light caught the texture of tweed. He was partially hidden behind a large pine tree, peeking out. He was much closer now, maybe only 15 feet away. He was peering around the bark, and those dark, shadowy voids where his eyes should have been fixed were right on me. It was a playful, mocking hide-and-seek. He wasn't just following me, he was hunting me. He was toying with me. The realization that he could move that fast in total silence through a dense forest was the final straw. I didn't need any more warnings. I didn't bother with threats or questions. I simply ran. I booked it back to my house. I run faster than I have ever run in my life. I didn't care about the branches whipping my face or the briars tearing at my jeans. I just pumped my legs and focused on the small light of my back porch in the distance. I could feel the presence behind me, a cold pressure on my back, but I didn't look. I knew if I looked and saw him right behind me, I would collapse from fear. I just ran. I burst out of the tree line and sprinted across the backyard. I scrambled up the wooden steps of the deck, practically falling onto the porch. Milo was there, huddled against the door, scratching frantically at the wood to be let in. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so violently I dropped them once. I picked them up, jammed the key into the lock, and threw the door open. Milo shot inside like a bullet. I followed him, slamming the door shut behind me and throwing the deadbolt. I locked the handle lock too. Then I ran to the front door and checked that. Then I ran around the entire first floor, checking every single window to make sure they were latched tight. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. I collapsed onto my couch, my chest heaving, sweat dripping down my face. Milo was under the coffee chair, his eyes wide, staring at the door. I sat there for hours, clutching a kitchen knife I had grabbed from the counter, just listening. I listened for footsteps on the porch. I listened for the doorknob turning, but there was nothing. Just the silence of the night returning to normal. Eventually, exhaustion overtook the adrenaline, and I passed out on the couch with the lights on. That was several months ago. You would think that as time passed, the fear would fade. You would think I would convince myself it was a hallucination, a trick of the light, or just a weird creeper who moved on. But I can't convince myself of that, because he hasn't moved on. Ever since that night, things have changed. I don't go into the woods anymore. I don't even go into the backyard at night. But the house doesn't feel like the sanctuary it used to be. Every few weeks, it happens. It usually starts when I am sitting in the living room, reading or watching TV late at night. The house will be quiet, and then I hear it. There is a noise at my window. It isn't the scratching of a branch, and it isn't the wind. It is a slow, loud, rhythmic tap, 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 tap. It sounds like a knuckle rapping against the glass. It is deliberate. It is asking for attention. The window where it happens is on the side of the house, where there are no trees close enough to hit the glass. Most of the nights it has happened, The air has been dead calm with zero wind. The first time it happened, I almost jumped out of my skin. I froze, staring at the curtains that were drawn tight. The tapping continued for a minute, steady and patient, and then stopped. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but what would I say? That someone tapped on my window. By the time they got out to my secluded house, whoever it was would be gone. And part of me, the part that remembered the impossible speed in the woods, knew that the police wouldn't find him anyway. It happened again 2 weeks later, then 3 weeks later. It has become a terrifying routine. Every time I hear that sound, tap, 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 my blood runs cold. I sit there, paralyzed on my couch, holding my breath. I never pull back the curtains. I never looked. I have thought about it. I had thought about ripping the curtain back to confront whoever is out there, to scream at them to leave me alone. But I stop myself every time. I am too scared to look. I know what is waiting for me on the other side of that thin pane of glass. I know that if I were to pull back that fabric and look out into the night, I wouldn't see an empty yard. I would see a man in a tweed jacket, his face pressed right up against the glass, with those empty, shadowy pits for eyes staring right into my soul. I think it is probably for the better that I don't look. The last thing I want to see is him smiling, knowing that I am trapped in here. And he is out there just waiting for me to make a mistake, so I just turn up the volume on the TV, hug my cat, and wait for the tapping to stop. David Parker Ray was a man who lived a double life for decades, appearing ordinary on the surface while hiding extreme cruelty behind closed doors. Over a period believed to stretch across 40 to 50 years, he kidnapped countless women and girls, with investigators estimating the number could be as high as 60. Many of his victims were never identified, and many were never found. What makes his crimes especially disturbing is how carefully planned and methodical they were, carried out in isolation and secrecy, far from public view. Ray would target women he believed were vulnerable. He often used drugs or blunt force to knock them unconscious before transporting them to a place he had prepared himself. This place was not an ordinary room. It was a homemade torture chamber designed specifically to control, restrain, and terrify. When his victims eventually woke up, they were usually chained and unable to move. Disoriented and in pain, they were forced to listen as a tape recording began to play. The recording was Ray's voice, calm and detailed, explaining what he planned to do to them. He spoke as if he were reading instructions, describing the abuse they would suffer and making it clear that escape was not an option. Hearing this recording while restrained and helpless was meant to break his victims mentally before anything else happened. Many people who have read the transcript or heard parts of the audio describe it as deeply upsetting and difficult to forget. Inside the chamber, Ray kept a large collection of tools and devices used to cause pain and fear. These included chains, restraints, cutting tools, and mechanical devices designed to hold the body in place. He also had diagrams and written notes explaining different methods he had practiced over the years. Everything in the room showed planning, repetition, and a complete lack of empathy. This was not chaos or impulse, it was routine. Ray did not always act alone. Investigators later uncovered evidence suggesting that he had help from accomplices, including some women he was involved with romantically. These individuals allegedly helped him lure victims, restrain them, or cover up evidence. This added another layer of horror, as it meant trust was used as a weapon, and danger sometimes came from those who appeared caring or familiar. The room itself was designed to amplify fear. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just pass through you, they stayed. Every story you heard tonight was real. Real people, real moments, and in every one of them, something went wrong, or almost did. If you want to keep exploring the stories that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Shadow Archives, because there are more stories waiting, and not all of them end before it's too late.